Mayor, if you want to go ahead and get us started, we can go ahead and begin.
Okay, well, good. Let me welcome everybody to what is our third meeting. And I want to first of all thank the Vice Mayor for leading us through our meeting last week. And it looked as though you all really accomplished a lot. And so thank you all for that. And for again coming out and taking your time to be a part of this work, which is going to be very significant for our city and community. All right, we want to do our roll call. And so I will go right down the list and call the roll. And if you're here, you're not here, he won't answer. So I'll go down the list that I have to make sure everybody's here. And I'll start with, of course, I see the Vice Mayor and I see many people here, but let me start with Pamela Smith.
Here.
Tommy Page.
Here, Mayor.
Jan Keister.
Here.
Andrea.
Here, Nicklum. Here.
All right. Bethany Lackey.
Here.
Antonio Segovia.
Here.
Brian Wells.
Here, Mayor.
Tamia Franco.
Here.
Chris Bryant.
Here. Chris Bryant's here.
Okay. Carl Willett.
Oh, here, Carol Rowlett, yes.
All right, Karen Beals.
Here.
Ellen Stick.
In this one.
Ellen, did I not hear, did I hear Ellen?
No, I don't think she's here.
Hello? Okay, I didn't hear it, and no response on that. Rachel Hopkins. Joe Rhodes.
Here, Mayor.
Okay. Cheryl Mosley. Cynthia Lawrence.
Here.
Landon Howard.
Here, Mayor.
Josh Raw. Pete Esselman.
Here.
Abby Hamilton. I think Abby.
She's here.
Okay. Shalene Powell.
I'm here. Hi, I'm here.
All right. Carol Tarrant.
Here.
Elder Downey.
Good morning, I'm here.
All right. And I know that Brenda Hill is here.
Yes, here.
Okay. Well, staff is Attorney Callahan, Tiffany Bradbury, Brent Robinson.
Brent's in here with us.
Okay, Angie O'Brien.
Yep. Angie is joining.
And Amelia Merchant.
And Merritt
I'm
Mignon
here.
are in the room with us as well.
Okay, I see your number there. Okay. All right. Those are all the names that I have, Bob. Is anybody else that names
Yep.
that I have? Okay.
Debbie Brown's here.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else whose name I did not call?
Troy Cook.
Debbie
Troy
Brown.
Cook.
All right, let's, okay, Rob and Stephanie.
Debbie Brown and Troy Cook.
Okay. Anyone else?
All right, Mayor, you do have a quorum, so thank you.
Okay.
Doors open.
All right. The second item that we need to do is the reading and approval of the minutes from last week's meeting.
I move to accept the minutes from approval from July the 1st.
Second.
Mayor,
Yes.
this is Vice Mayor Cobb. I just have a couple of revisions as a friendly amendment. Under number 1, the roll call, there are a couple of places where it says Vice Mayor, Mayor. If we could, under number 1, if we could remove the second mayor there. So it just says Vice Mayor called the meeting. And then Cheryl Mosley's name, I believe, is Mosley, not Moseley. And then under number 2, it says Vice Mayor, Mayor. If we could just take out the second mayor. Those are just some edits that I offer as a friendly amendment.
I
Okay.
accept the friendly amendments.
All right. Is there a second?
I think Cynthia, seconded.
Yeah, there was a second.
All right. All right. Let me be known. All those in favor of the minutes of July 1, let it be known by saying aye.
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 All right. All those opposed. All right. All right. We'll go now down to report of officers. All right. And I'm going to call on either the city manager or Vice Mayor Cobb to, you all went into some groups last week. And so we want to, can you share with us what are the report of the officers?
Yeah, Mayor, if it's okay, I'll cover kind of some of that when we get into the new business. Otherwise, there are no reports from me. I don't know if Vice Mayor has any.
I would just ask, did everyone with the reporting out through 2 different emails this week from our city manager, did everyone get the attachments, including the reporting from our breakout sessions?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Again, if anybody had difficulty receiving those, just let Bob know. But I think that resolves some of the issues we had, Bob.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we're down to item number 4, which is unfinished business. And
There is no unfinished business, Mayor.
I'm having trouble with my audio. It's breaking up. Bob, did you say something? Did someone say anything?
Yes, there is no unfinished business.
All right. Joe, your audio is coming through loud and clear than anybody else. So can you repeat that? Because it's not coming through well on my machine.
Bob said there's no, Bob, you're coming through kind of muffled and distant from my end. I don't know if that's true of anybody else. It may be the masks. But Mayor, there's no unfinished business, so you can go on to number 5.
All right, which is the discussion of initiatives for City of Roanoke and the public hearing, and that's new business. And we have a public hearing next Tuesday, the 14th, I see. All right, where are we on the discussions of the initiatives of new business?
Okay, so can you all hear me okay now?
It's much better.
Yes, it was just the mask, sorry. So let me, I'll get us up to speed. I think most everyone that is here today has participated in the previous meetings. And so I'll try not to repeat things too much of where we are But as you all know, for the past couple of meetings, we have focused on kind of idea generation or sort of brainstorming. We reviewed what the purpose and scope of the task force is, and then started working on the ideas from the task force. And just by way of reminding folks, the objective here is that we're trying to advise the council on ways in which this group feels that dollars that have been made available to support recovery would best be spent in doing that, and with an eye toward not only the recovery, but also helping to bring greater resiliency to the community and to the members of the community, and all of that wrapped within kind of an equitable resolution or equitable approach to this. So that's sort of the charge of the group. You all will remember that the buckets of money that we have available come from 3 or 4 different sources, each with their own timeline and limitations. But the important thing to remember is the most significant amount of funds coming from the CARES Act is the funding that has to be spent by the end of this calendar year and comes with the greatest strings attached. So important to remember that, obviously. At the last meeting, we really focused predominantly on identifying the initiatives and projects that may be worthy of forwarding for recommendation. And you all have done that as a group, and you all have done that as part of breakout sessions. And in a few minutes, we're actually going to break out into rooms again to pick up a piece of that work. But what I wanted to do was explain a bit of what you have in your minutes and also what you'll be using in the next piece. So if you have access to your minutes, what I'm going to focus on is the part that looks like the two or three pages that are the matrix. So I know y'all can't see this very well, but it's the one that has all the grids, that has the information that's in there. And I'll explain what that is and then how we're going to use that in the next session as we go forward. So within that information, each of the areas, each of the sectors that we have talked about previously are identified in there. So you'll see one that has highlighted healthcare and biomedical research, one for hospitality and entertainment, one for small business, and so on. So each of those are there. What I have then done on the left side of that matrix is you'll see where it says individual and family, business and organization, and community in each of those blocks, each of those groupings. So try to take what you all have identified so far and associate it with, does it primarily benefit individuals and families, or businesses and organizations, or the overall community within each of those sectors? So that's why those are there. Then as you move to the right on there, you'll see at the top, you'll see one that says recovery and one that says resiliency. So similarly, I've tried to group those initiatives in a way that identifies, is this predominantly going to benefit us either as individuals and families, or as business and organizations, or as the community during the recovery phase, so addressing most immediate needs, and or something that is likely to build greater resiliency, maybe even be a bit longer term in its resolutions. And so I've tried to put those in those grids just to begin kind of giving some shape to it. Part of the reason for that is this also hopefully will help us identify places where we've got obvious gaps, where we look in and say, hey, in this particular category, we've really not identified any initiatives that are oriented toward individuals, let's say. Everything we've done is oriented towards the community. And do we want to add anything? Is it appropriate to add anything? So it's tried to do that, or helps highlight that, hopefully, as you go through. I wouldn't be overly concerned that there are fewer items in the resiliency side of things, because that's expected. I mean, obviously, the majority of the effort and the majority of the funding is going to go to address the shorter term needs associated with recovery, if, again, for no other reason, because we've got to spend the money by the end of the year. So I wouldn't be too overly concerned with that. But it is good to know that we are beginning to identify things that will transcend the next few months and actually support efforts going forward with it. So that's how this is arranged and what its purpose is. in a few moments, we're actually going to break back into the breakout rooms that we had last time, where you'll be grouped with folks that bring the similar perspective based on their assignments from the council with this. And I'm going to ask you to start prioritizing these, and I'll talk about more in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to do two things. I want to first ask, does anyone have any questions about what this is showing, or any concerns about what this is showing? That's question number one. And then number two is, in the space that we've had between last week and this week, are there any other initiatives that you don't see reflected in here, either that you feel like were mentioned in the discussions before, or that you've thought of since then? And I actually have, I've actually identified two that I'll share with you after we first entertain kind of that first question. So the first question is, does everyone understand this? Are there any questions about how this is structured right now? Everybody feels okay with that? Okay, well then let me turn to the second piece, the second question, which is, are there any initiatives that you feel like were mentioned previously that are not in here, or that you've thought of since then? And before you answer that, let me give you two that I've identified, and these came actually out of the conversations that I referenced before that the council had with focus group meetings a couple of weeks prior to this effort. So one of those falls in the category of small business, and I'm calling it entrepreneurial support. So this would be funds to assist, for example, RAMP and the CoLab. That was an item that had come up previously in the discussions. And the other one is actually in the healthcare biomedical research area, which was funds to cover the increased costs borne by our health clinics in the community. That came up previously also, that a lot of our clinics provide services at no cost or very low cost, and they've seen increases in either providing telemedicine or just in PPE or those kinds of things. And that had come up in previous discussions too. So those were two initiatives that I will add to this list also that we had not previously identified. So I again will ask you all if there are any items that you feel need to be added to this list for whatever reason, that again, either we've missed previously or that you've thought of since. And again, if there isn't, don't worry about it. I just want to give this opportunity in case there is something missing.
I have something. I didn't see a list in there for, because I talked to Bradley Free Clinic and the Restoration, and they're both interested in offering testing at their site for their clients.
I've got Cynthia on the in the healthcare item, in the column that, or in the row that's community, and in the column for recovery, it says increased availability of testing. So that's what that one was trying to capture.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for making sure it was in there.
This is Brian Wells. Hey, in hotel entertainment, there's a mention for PPE. There is no mention of labor, but it might be effective to have some labor assigned for a healthcare professional to help administer health checks, temperature checks for large conferences at the conference center.
Yeah.
And another idea separate from that, if it's helpful for the local farmers that might not be able to attend the farmers market, having some way to connect restaurants, local restaurants, with the folks who are active with the farmers market.
Yeah, that's good. Now I will put that one in the small business. I've got one that kind of links the restaurants and live performing arts, but I'll add one that links the restaurants and local farmers markets if they're not, or local farmers if they're not already linked in that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob,
Yes.
this is Joe. I just noticed in the grids that all the categories but small business and manufacturing have some items listed under resiliency. So it may be helpful for those two breakout groups to hone in on that and see if there's anything under the recovery components that could also be built out in resiliency. And I wonder too if there's a way we may be limited in the federal funding, but in the general funds, we may be able to build in an initiative that is in, I don't know, something that kind of incentivizes economic development in the small business manufacturing areas, particularly with people of color, minority development, under the resilience dimension of this. It's just a thought, and it may already be there, but I just didn't see it.
Well, I think if you're thinking, Joe, of something that's kind of like a grant or loan program or something that either helps start up minority-owned businesses or sustain those, separate and apart from really the direct COVID impacts, I would add that as a separate item and put that into the resiliency piece, because I think that is beyond the short-term recovery. So I'll add that in both the manufacturing side as well as the small business side.
Thank you.
And Bob, this is Andrea McClellan. I have a question.
Yes.
I know we talked last time about whether we were going to be able to communicate with the superintendent of Roanoke City Schools in terms of what their initiatives were or are, and if we're duplicating any of those efforts. And I didn't know if that was possible. It might be in the notes somewhere. I didn't see anything about that. But from an education perspective, I'm wondering if we've had any success getting in touch with Roanoke City Public Schools.
We've had conversations with those, and I know Jarrell has brought this up also. They're not far enough along in the development of their reopening plans yet to give us that information, but that is something we still will absolutely want to do, because I know a number of the initiatives you all have identified relate directly to education, and we'll need to determine where we can avoid overlap if it's appropriate. But yes, right now they're just not far enough into those plans yet.
Okay.
And we'll be meeting with our school board and school administration as a whole, the council next month.
Yeah. And they'll definitely, I understand they'll be issuing those kind of the reopening plans obviously relatively soon. So I think from there, we'll then be able to say if those are the reopening plans, have they identified kind of the expenditures they need to actually support those reopening plans, which I know they are. They're working with those.
Bob, this is Shalene. I see something that's needs to be added to the arts and culture section. I see grants, and I assume that's to help with operating and just continuing to keep operations open. That's a question, but also COVID outfitting so that there's like cleaning. Like for cleaning and sanitation. And I know we had addressed air filtration systems or some sort of updated filters for the public gathering spaces when production shows whatnot start back up. I just wanted, but that was mentioned last time. I don't necessarily see it. I don't see it in the matrix.
You're right. That is one definitely. And your first question regarding grants, yes, the assumption with that is those would be funds that would be made available, so in effect they can stay in business during this.
Okay.
The
Thanks.
Cleaning, air filtration piece I'll add in there. That is, it's not on the list right now. Thank you.
Bob, this is Tamia. If we could just go back 1 minute. The money has got to be spent by the end of December. I don't see any benefit of using any money to fund new businesses. It's not going to be enough unless you give it all to them. It's not going to be enough to start up a small business.
Yeah,
and why don't we get the SBA or the Small Business Development Center or SCORE involved in that?
Yeah, and to me, I think that what you just identified is probably how you would be able to do that in this time frame. That's probably it. It would be, for example, providing funding to the Small Business Development Center so that they could assist small businesses further, and that would qualify as having actually expended the money by the end of the year.
Okay.
Right. And
Okay, so it's not going directly into someone that's got a great idea that everyone knows will fail,
yeah, they would be
right?
similar to what I think you would do with like, say the ramp or a collab, where they're, they themselves might be providing either funding or space or assistance for small businesses, but the funding in this program would actually go to that organization so they can support that.
Okay, got it. I like that idea. Okay. And are we supposed to, when we break out into our groups, are we going to be just filling in the resiliency that we see in putting money in these areas? Is that what we're going to be doing?
No, when we break out in the small group, we're going to focus on priority. I'll give more instructions on that in just a minute.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
And again, just to remind everyone that even though, again, the majority of the funding has that clock by the end of the year, there is, as the Vice Mayor had alluded to, there is two pots of money really here that don't have that same clock. There's a $500,000, which is general fund money, which does not have the same calendar year limitation. And then there is some Cdbg funding, which is designated for small business support, which has a longer clock running. It just doesn't have quite the flexibility because it's actually already identified what it's for. I think that was about $300,000, I think, in that pot of money. Any other items on the list that to be added or questions?
Yes, Bob, this is Elda. I'd like to go to the very bottom to the education section, and if possible, add interpretation services there as well. I think the Roanoke City Schools already has folks who help with this, but they are usually overloaded. And I would imagine this will overload them even more. So to make sure that there are enough people to assess both interpretation and translation resources for the families.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
So,
You see the question in the chat box from Jan.
So Jan's question is about the funding. Short-term grants to organizations doesn't have to be spent by the organizations by December 31st. Yes, so if we provided funding to, let's say CoLab, for example, it would have to be for a purpose that they could fully expend those dollars by the end of the year, if it was out of the funds coming from the CARES Act. And when we get into, because of that, when we get into actually sort of working on these priority lists, and we may move some things around based on their funding in order to match up what the timeline looks like that might work for those. But yes, Jan, you're right, that they actually have to have spent those monies. And then Jan's asking about the Cdbg funding, saying, hasn't it already been awarded? Because she got an award letter. Yes, you remember the Cdbg gave us we got about an extra $2 million, a little over $2 million of Cdbg funds. There was one award, though, about $300 and some thousand, which was set aside for small business assistance with no further clarification in that. So if this group decides that there's a small business component that falls within the Cdbg program guidelines, then we will likely use those dollars, will shape how those dollars will get used. The other Cdbg money has already been committed, as was mentioned. And then see, there was a question about a link that's been provided, and yeah, so you've got the link in there. So, all right, good questions. Yes, thank you. And thanks for reminding me, Joe. I always forget that the chat's over there, even though it's like about this big in here. So, thank you. Well, what I'd like to do at this point is, the intention is to break out into the breakout rooms, and this is going to be a faster breakout session than last time. So this is only going to be about 15 minutes. And what I would like you to begin doing, and don't get overly concerned about the efficiency of this or exactly how this works out, because this is just our first shot. But let's say, for example, that you are in the arts and culture room. What we're going to ask you to do is look at the items that have been identified in your area. So in that arts and culture area, and as a group, if you could identify the 3 initiatives out of that list that you believe to be the most significant or the most important, please do that, and have someone in the group record what those 3 were. What we're then going to do is we'll come back as a full group. And if today I'm making this number up because I don't know how many I have, but let's say we have 60 items on this list. If we do this right, we'll come back with 24 items because there are 8 groups. You'll each have 3 that you've got as priorities. We'll come back with 24 items. We'll then talk as a group about those 24 items. What we're starting to do now is move from the identification of possible initiatives into beginning to prioritize those initiatives. And then I'll talk about how this links with what we're going to ask the community to do in the public hearing, which again is scheduled for next week. So that's why it's only 15 minutes, because it's intended to be fairly quick, top of mind. Not going to dig really deep into any of these at this point. Don't worry about where the money will come from or the timeliness aspect of it or anything like that at this point. We'll deal with that as we move on. This is really about being able to say, okay, when I look at these 9 or 10 things in my area, clearly these 3 are the ones I think right now warrant the most attention, are the most important within that area. Does that make sense? Everybody understand that? Everybody okay with that? All right, well, yeah. Hopefully this works as well as it did last time. So most of you will go into a breakout room. There will be a staff person, hopefully, in each of those rooms that will help you, again, with this. If there is not, then y'all are on your own. Please make sure you have someone in the group who will keep track of the 3 items and that you'll be able to bring back. A few of you will stay in this main room and we'll work through, and again, 15 minutes, and then we'll come back into the large group as well. So I'll see you back here in 15 minutes.
There we go. In 3, 2, 1.
Okay. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And there we go.
Can you pull up the list when you guys work in your group off of the website so that Mignon can
Yes.
reference it? Thank you.
Yes.
Because we've got it up on the website.
Okay, perfect. And I am going to start a timer. Let's see. Think. And it worked.
All right, I'm back.
And I'm going to start a timer.
Thank you.
Hey, we seem to have somebody with the phone number ending in 5238. I don't know who that is.
I think it's Dan Callahan.
Oh, Dan Kelly. Okay.
He's supposed to be with us. So he's our, I think, Dan. Dan is.
And we have Elda down twice, it looks like, but okay, she can talk twice.
Well, I know one of the other members too, they were on there, but they were having trouble hearing one way, so they just kind of dialed.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is Elda. My laptop froze, so I'm here on my phone.
Yay.
It works.
Okay, well, I'll jump in and start then and say, I noticed that childcare is like in priority for the whole sheet, so I would probably want to make that one of the things. Mm-hmm.
I'm making the assumption that we're looking specifically under vulnerable population and nonprofits.
Oh yeah, that's us.
Okay. We didn't really define our group last time. We just started talking broadly.
Yeah, because we're supposed to be in the main room because there is a room for healthcare and vulnerable population and nonprofit. So I'm not sure. I'm trying to pull it up because I'm going to share.
That seems to be what we discussed, is the stuff under vulnerable population nonprofits. I recognize things that we talked about quite a bit.
Yeah.
That other people didn't, like system navigation. We really went into deeply and nobody else talked about that.
Yeah, Jan, I agree with you that childcare is the main priority across the board. I do feel like that mental health aspect is going to be important for our group to highlight as well, because it isn't across the board in a lot of those other categories, and it's our opportunity to advocate for that mental health resiliency for the community aspect. Because I bet childcare is going to come up in a lot of other places too and be highlighted.
I agree. Elda?
Yeah, I agree with that. And going through the whole chart, it feels like some of the issues that we're discussing and that we're advocating really permeate every one of these areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what would be the best way to make sure that these issues show up in every area without necessarily repeating the same information in every area? Like, for example, the education component, I thought it was key to include one of the things that we have touched on a lot, which is interpretation services for the families with the kids in the schools. So, how else to sort of revise this chart and make sure that the populations that we're sort of advocating for are receiving not extra or special care, but, the sort of the designated type of help and services that they need in each of those areas. Like, for example, in hospitality, a lot of the employees are probably going to be folks who are from different backgrounds, who might also need interpretation, etc. So I'm seeing this so well organized. I'm wondering how to weave through and really permeate some of the issues that that really stand out for all the categories. And childcare, of course, is one of them, as well as mental health.
Elda, what do you think about the interpretation piece of what we're talking about? Are you saying that we should talk about it broadly, or are you saying we should hone in? How would we weave in the interpretation piece? Because I think it's an issue in across the board in all of these different categories, not just the ones that it's listed in, because it's such, like I was saying before, such a barrier to services, And
Right.
So I'm wondering if that should be one of our priorities too, and saying that it's not just about education, even though that's an important aspect of it, but it's a major barrier to service for many vulnerable populations.
And I think that's what I'm wondering and hope that our group can discuss is, some of these issues that we're advocating for, like interpretation. Is it something that we want to keep sort of separate under the vulnerable population, or do we want to make it, more holistic, that somehow we can make sure it's in each of these categories? And I'm not sure what the best approach is, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about it. I think, it's something that permeates the entire scenario, right? So how best to, how to house it, separate or overarching, I'm not sure.
I don't see whatever language services as such a big deal, because we use them a lot, and it's just easy. You just sign up for a language service. I can see that it could certainly be a part of anything that deals with essentially the entire population, because we do have so many different cultures here. Now, what I see is a priority issue would be assistance with rent and mortgages. And most of that is because I know that there's already an underfunded agency doing it, and all you have to do is plop them the funds and they can spend it in the 4 months easily. So I would like to see that a priority issue, but I agree that interpretation is important, just as it can be a sub part of it. For example, one of my organizations provides legal services. That's a part of it, but it's just a minor part.
Right, but I think, Jen, the point of the translation interpretation is that it gives access to any of these services, right? So what you just mentioned, mortgage assistance, rent assistance, I think some of the populations, that I work with, know that they have to pay rent right now. When it comes to contracts or making exceptions, or however this pans out, of rent abatement, rent assistance, those are the things that need to be interpreted for people to understand, especially our more of our refugee population, or the more, I guess, needier immigrant populations come from places where, these services work very differently. And so it's not just linguistically, but culturally, that needs to be interpreted for them. And so I agree with you, it's kind of like, it's kind of like in your portfolio of services, you also have translation and interpretation, right? But if you don't have that there, then folks don't have access to the services because they don't understand them. They don't know what it is. They might have a printout of something, but not understand the language, much less what they're supposed to do with it.
Yeah, just as I'm looking at this in dollar and cents, as part of, for example, if I was an organization, it would be hard to spend a lot of money on it. It's just not. I mean, for example, I spend a few $100s a year for probably about 2,500 people, many of whom are non-native English speakers. So it certainly, as I say, could be part of it, but I don't see it as a major. If I had to pick three things here, I don't see that as one of the three things. Would rather see something like, if you're providing childcare, that should be part of the childcare that's being provided. So, for example, when I write a grant application, there's a main thing that we're doing. We'll say provide childcare, but the grantor also is going to have a list of other things that could be important. And it usually has a component of, are you helping minorities? Are you helping people from other cultures, whatever? So we could suggest that some of this be priorities.
Right. So I think that's what sort of what I'm trying to grasp is, is this, do we nest this as a subset of those three priorities you're mentioning, right? And how to list it as a subset so it doesn't get lost in the mix, right? So it stands out as, maybe it's priority A, and this is on a, a list underneath as, number 5 within priority A. I agree with you. There's things are much more important in terms of big global priorities over language services, but language services has to be nested within the priorities.
And when we're talking about spending money, I think language services are actually really expensive for people who do not have assistance with it. I know that firsthand in working in a nonprofit that works specifically with refugees and other immigrant populations. And so it's a real burden unless there's a grant. And I'm thinking about the mental health aspect of it too, that there are a lot of mental health agencies who have a lot of difficulty finding interpreter services at a cost that they can afford. And so that creates that barrier to mental health services that are so needed within those communities. So
now one thing that we could do here is be a little bit, I don't know, play the game here maybe, and not list childcare as one of our priorities and assume that everybody else will, and instead use language interpretive services as one of our choices and 2 of the other things.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about that? Like, we don't have to list childcare as a priority. We all know it is.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's a pretty good bet. And I think that once we lock in our answers, it might not be the very last word that we get in it too. So if we did choose the others, mental health, mental health, rent assistance, and interpreter services, then, I mean, if we never hear childcare come up again, which I don't think is going to be an issue, then we can speak up and advocate for that too.
Because I think we could package it as access, which is already one of the keywords in our part of the chart, right? Access and assistance, because you can think about in the hospitality business as well, there are restaurant owners who I'm thinking just to say an example, Tacos Rojas, right? We all know them. They're downtown. They're towards Grandin. They might need not only the financial assistance, right, but somebody from language services who can help them navigate the system, right? So maybe if we repackage it as access, that might be one way to go with it.
We're at about 2.5 minutes left.
Okay, so I'm hearing we are prioritizing childcare, mental health, and interpretive I will get that word down, services. Are we in agreement there, or is there something else that,
How come, Jack, how about we call it access services so that we can have sort of the language component in there and other sort of, basically somebody who can guide people to do certain things. And that applies to, any vulnerable population, not just the vulnerable populations who have the language barrier, right?
I'm confused. How would you put that again? Access to?
Access services, just a broad access services, which would include language services, but then also somebody who would be, say, like the role of an advocate, right? Somebody who can work with a family who's impacted in two or three of these areas and help guide them as to, the how to do things. Like at our last meeting, somebody made a comment about how minority small business owners did not receive PPP funding because they don't have a relationship with a bank, which is, a completely unfounded claim. But, maybe some minority business owners do need help navigating a banking system in a different way, right? So, and that we can have a big umbrella access service component that includes language, but also includes some kind of role for advocates to help people navigate all these options and all these things that they might need.
I think my fear in that is that that money would go toward a secondary service instead of directly funding like rent and utility assistance.
Okay.
And so we wouldn't have as much control over it. And so we would be putting money into this pot and we're not really sure where it's going to go. I believe that advocacy is important and advocate is important. But I think honing in and making sure those dollars go where we want them to go is also really important.
Okay.
That's why I'm thinking interpretive services, because we know how important that is. Mental health, which we are all in agreement on, and then rent and utility services, because I don't know if that's going to come up in those other places. What do you think?
We're getting ready to wrap it up. Our time is up.
Okay. That sounds good.
Let me see if we can get everybody back now. That's always the thing. All right. And here we go. Here comes everybody back. Actually, they get another minute. So you guys get another minute to hash out like who wants to.
People are coming back.
Be the talker or be the presenter on behalf of your group.
Bethany, would you like to present for our group?
Oh, sure. That'd be fun.
Thank you.
Sure.
Real quick, what did we decide on? I got lost for a minute.
And interpreter services, childcare, mental health. Interpreter services, rent and utility assistance, mental health.
Okay, that's where we were when my computer
Yeah.
was off. Okay. Cool.
Does that sound good, Jan?
Yes.
Great.
And I'll add our caveat about childcare.
Yes. And that was in access to interpretive and other services, right? Okay.
This is like magic.
It is.
Fun, right?
Vice Mayor.
Yes.
Are you? This is Cynthia again. Don't lose that job displaced worker avenue. I think finding jobs in the healthcare field, again, we can address it holistically, but certainly that is a major industry sector, and I think we could focus that somehow.
Okay, I've got it. Thank you.
This door doesn't open. That's weird. Never been locked into a room before. All right.
Here, I got it.
That's bizarre.
We've already been there with some interviews. The candidates all got locked in.
Good, then I don't feel bad. All right, now I'm back.
That's fun.
Thank you for rescuing me.
Sure, absolutely.
So are we on? We're good?
Yeah,
All right.
I think everybody came
All right.
back.
Thank you all. Sorry I was delayed slightly because I actually got locked in a room. I have no idea how you get locked into a room, but apparently we have a room that locks you in, so, okay. Well, thank you all. Hopefully everybody's work was productive. And again, I apologize that it was fast, but it was intentionally fast so that we kind of captured sort of top of mind. So Mayor, if it's okay, what I'd like to do is go kind of group by group to sort of have the group report out what their top three were, if that's okay. And I think each group should have a spokesperson.
Yes, sir. That's fine.
All right, so if we're ready, whoever was with healthcare and biomedical research, if you would report out your top three.
Okay, this is Joe. I'll do that. And I believe we also had vulnerable populations. So there may be a little overlap, but I'm going to report for both of those. For vulnerable populations and nonprofits, we talked about our three priorities are, first of all, basic needs, which would include childcare, healthy food, utilities, rent, mortgages, and transportation. Second is mental health care, both access to it and increase in service availability. And third was system navigation and communication. And what we mean by that is both traditional and non-traditional forms of communication in a broad-based way that helps people navigate these systems of recovery and resilience. So that was one category. Okay, it looks like someone else had this too, so never mind. We talked about both because we had vulnerable populations in our heading. Anyway, under healthcare and biomedical research, interpretive services are a priority for us, particularly related to trauma and the increased trauma related to this recovery and resilience. And by interpretive services, we not only mean access to interpretation in our broad-based communities, but also engaging and empowering vulnerable communities to both educate and inform their communities. So it's not just someone else giving them the information, but it's them actually accessing the information and being able to educate their peers and their communities. We talked about a second priority was increased availability of proper testing. This needs to be amplified. For us, this was one of our major priorities, increased availability of proper testing in a broad-based way. And then the third priority was job training for displaced workers toward healthcare fields, but toward other fields as well.
Very good.
Did I report that out adequately, group?
Yes.
Thank
Yes, thank you.
And again, apologies for overlapping into the vulnerable communities.
As long as we caught everything, we're good. So, all right, the next one is the hospitality and entertainment. And I think Shalene is going to report on this one.
Hey, okay. So our group had come up with, here are our top three. The first of which is providing marketing funds to promote reopening. The second is funds to support a link between restaurants and also live performing arts. And then the third would be workforce funds to regain employment. And this also then would fall into resiliency.
Yeah, I had too much, so.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, somebody just didn't have their phone muted.
I understand. So that third one was the workforce funds to regain employment. And this, as I said, falls in the ability to retrain and employ. And so it would therefore then fill in the resiliency column as well. And we added a 3A and just to accent the continued need for PPE in the hospitality and entertainment sector. So I think that covers it for us.
The only thing I'll add, since it came up in the previous discussion, is under that PPE item, that includes personnel associated with like healthcare checks, that type of thing. So it's the full spectrum of PPE. Thank you, Shalene. The next one was small business.
This is Rob. Let me be the spokesperson for this group. We actually combined small business with the manufacturing category as well, and came up with 4 top thoughts. And the first would be funding to bring back furloughed employees. That was a topic that is tantamount to making sure small business is successful. We felt that getting employees back to work was critical, and any way to support funding for that would be ideal. We also selected sort of the debt service, if you will, debt servicing grants to help support small business, and particularly in a domino effect, the vendors that are relying on them for payments. So we were adding that. That's not only likely good for recovery, but also resiliency. The third item was assistance with HR and legal questions. Many small businesses often don't have adequate HR staff, and certainly at some point maybe even can't afford great legal advice. So funding for that would be our third choice. And then because we combined the 2 categories, we felt we needed a 4th in there. And just as we were getting ready to jot that down, we were cut off and brought back into the group. So I'm going to have to ask my group, Tamia, Troy, and Kat, could you define for us what was number 4 on that list?
They're all thinking.
Tamia, what was your 4th one that you wanted to highlight?
Yep.
I think it was.
I'm sorry, I thought I lost you. I'm sorry, I thought I lost you. I think the 4th one was restaurant or outdoor businesses, supporting the restaurants or the outdoor businesses.
Okay, thanks, Tamia.
That was
You're welcome.
That was in the form of like what we talked about for kind of the grants towards small businesses and outdoor recreation businesses. That's what that was.
Yes, and we added, Tamia particularly mentioned restaurant work, but it would fall under the small business category anyway, so that assistance could be useful for them.
Got it, thank you. And Karen had put a note on here. I apologize for this. I didn't realize that when you went into the breakout rooms, I didn't realize that it didn't identify what room you were in. So I think it just probably said room 1, room 2, or whatever. So hopefully you all remembered what groups you were in. So that's some of the confusion about what groups you were representing. So yes, in the future when we break out, I'll remind folks what it is that the group is that you are assigned to. So sorry for that confusion. So you captured manufacturing. So the next one should be outdoor recreation.
Okay, this is Pete Eshelman. I'll report out for us. So our 3 areas, the number 1 being a fund for maintenance and enhancement of outdoor assets. Last meeting where we gave the example of something modeled on the Civilian Conservation Corps. The idea would be a program that actually puts unemployed people to work right now. The easiest example to understand would be kind of doing trail work and maintenance on parks, put-ins, different things like that. So that's number one. Number two would be COVID-safe parks and recreation programming. So an example would be new equipment that allows them to kind of still provide programming. Also equipment that would allow them to take programming into neighborhoods. So kind of more mobile, portable equipment would be another example of that as well. And then the third one, which is probably going to be encompassed in other areas already, but is funds or grant programs or loan programs for outdoor-oriented organizations, including small businesses, nonprofits, and then events and festivals as well.
Thank you, Pete.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one is arts and culture. Anyone feel like they got assigned to that group? If we had in that room.
It would have been, that was your group with hospitality and entertainment. So
Okay.
it was like
So it was in there.
Brian Wells, Landon, Shalene, and
So,
Tommy.
so apparently Shalene and Brian and Tommy, we were in the arts and culture group too. See, we didn't even know it. So I already know. I'll take the. I will take the opportunity to say that I know one of them dealt with the grants, so the funding piece, because that came up in our discussion, which was to ensure that funding very similar to the programs that have been made for small businesses to recover from their loss of revenue opportunities, something similar for the arts and culture organizations within our community. So that was one of them, was funding. I think the other one that we talked about in the other group that was tied to this dealt with the PPE, the increased costs provided to provide PPE, cleaning, air filtration, that type of thing, to equip venues to be able to be ready. Those were two that we had talked about in the other group that would relate to this. I think that you all had identified further. And in fairness, we didn't talk about the other ones because we focused on the hospitality and entertainment. So Shalene, Tommy, I don't know, Brian, I don't know if you all have that item pulled up in front of you that shows kind of those arts and culture, if there are any other items on that list that you would say, yes, that needs to be added to that list as well. Shalene, I see.
I heard I've heard a lot of feedback from organizations, and also in our breakout chat from our previous meeting with the task force about partnerships with schools, funding to, promote that link between schools. So that kind of connects with childcare, but also especially in this time period where all of our schools might be only in school for a couple of days a week. So that to me would be one that would rise.
That was one I know that came up in a couple of the earlier discussions as well, is the way that if students are only going to school for a couple of days or week on, week off kind of thing, is there a way to use some of the cultural institutions with curriculum to actually sustain kind of the other days, if you will, and stuff? So, okay, very good, thank you. Not bad, since we didn't talk about those, so I appreciate it. So the last one is education.
Bob, did you get to vulnerable and nonprofit? Did we just discuss that? Sorry.
No, I mean, I just grabbed, I thought you all covered that, so I will go to vulnerable. All right, I'll go to vulnerable and nonprofits. So whoever's reporting out on that one.
This is Bethany Lackey. All of these things felt very important to us, so it was a difficult conversation, but we started out in agreement upon mental health expansion, and especially accessibility to mental health services for vulnerable populations, people in poverty, and specifically about trauma recovery, especially, and resilience. We discussed, this is right in alignment with what Joe talked about too. The rent and utility assistance is going to be incredibly important going forward. And then interpreter services we discussed as being important across all of these sectors that we're discussing, because it means accessibility to all of those services. And so interpreter services, the expansion as well as the access to those services are really important to us. So those are our top three: mental health, rent and utility assistance, and interpreter services. We also discussed childcare, and I imagine that's going to come up across the board too.
All right, very good, thank you. And then that brings us to education.
This is Andrea Micklem. So Amelia, Pamela, and Jarrell and I looked at the items on the matrix addressing education, and childcare was one of the items that we kept on the list, of course, because that affects all the sectors. We also talked about one of our points of import being internet access and access to devices for distance learning. We also, on our top three, had to choose, and the safety of our kids as being one of the most important things to deal with. The cleaning products, the PPE, transportation, and safety in a way that we can keep our kids safe. And then we had a fourth as well. We thought that the funding to address youth advocate programs in collaboration with community resources to deal with trauma and issues like the need for interpretive services. So we would have childcare, internet access, the safety of our children, and PPE and cleaning products, and then funding for collaboration with the community. And our hope is that Roanoke City Public Schools will be able to help with some of these costs, and that as a community, we might be able to spend more of our funding for the collaboration between the community and the schools.
Thank you. Yeah, and we will, as mentioned earlier, I mean, we will definitely continue to interact with the school administration as they start to develop their list, so that we can kind of refine what it is that we might, through this effort, want to prioritize and stuff as well. So, very good, thank you. Did I get everyone, all the groups? Did I miss anyone? Every group has reported out. All right, very good. Before we move to the next piece of the conversation, is there anything else based on, now that you all have heard what each of the groups have reported out, is there anything out of that list that you heard that you have either that you have concerns with? And then the flip side of it is there anything that you've heard in all of our other discussions, or in your discussions out in the community, or with the perspective that you bring, that you felt like you're surprised isn't on that list of priorities? Everybody relatively good with this list right now? And again, it's not the final list, but Bethany, you unmuted yourself. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it came up and maybe I didn't hear it, but did Wi-Fi hotspots or broadband expansion come up in any of our discussions? I know it's a popular item in the other cities that you listed when we were talking about other locations and how they're spending this funding. But I'm wondering if that internet accessibility has been brought up in these conversations.
Yeah, the education.
Yes, we talked about it.
Item, yeah. Is that Pam? Is that Pam, did you?
Yeah, we talked about it in education.
And I think it reported out as increasing access to broadband and availability of devices to allow distance learning. So.
Okay, I just missed it. Thank you.
And I know some of you have previously highlighted that, let's not forget that it's not just that kind of increased access for youth, that there are also those that are seeking either higher education or even employment opportunities that likewise need access to that piece. So I would say think of that in its broadest sense. And that may go back to something that was mentioned earlier, that it may be that the schools, through their funding, are able to cover, for example, the cost of all of the devices that the students need. But if we still have a need in our community for others that aren't youth to be able to access it, that may still be a need that you all would want to continue to recommend as a result. So, all right, very good, thank you. Any other, anyone else, anything that you thought you would thought that would have made it on the list, or that's just kind of missing here? All right, not seeing any at this point. Let me let me explain then what I would propose to be kind of the next piece of this this conversation. So what you all have done right now is, you know, it lasts over a couple of very fast weeks. You have begun to assemble kind of the menu of possible things that could be done. And through this last exercise, you've started to really kind of refine those down to the most important things that will assist the community in its recovery efforts and move them along the way into the resiliency side of things. There are two things that we're going to do, then three things actually that we're going to do on the heels of this. So one of those is each of these prioritized items that you've listed, we will run through a version of that equity tool that I provided to you all in your update. So there's an organization called GARE, G-A-R-E, which actually promotes equity throughout governments. And they have been working with a number of cities, two of which I included, which were Minneapolis and San Antonio, in helping them way before COVID in dealing with equity issues. But specifically, they've crafted some tools to assist them as they go through the very exercise that we're going through. And they prepared these kind of quick tools for addressing equity as they make these kind of considerations. And so they've just listed 3 or 4 questions that every one of these items that you've identified, we will run through. So let me give you an example of that as we use that tool. So we will ask of these, we'll ask questions like, who would benefit from the particular initiative? Can the initiative be prioritized for people and families most in need and already marginalized? Is the service associated with the initiative accessible regardless of one's ability or status? Will the initiative help build toward a more just and sustainable future? And that really speaks to our resiliency piece of it, I think, as well. And then can or is someone else providing or performing the initiative? So those questions will be asked of each of these. The real principle, I don't think any of the things that have been identified would get kicked out based on any of these questions as being inequitable. The real value of it is it will allow us to sort of tailor the initiative based on the answers to that question. So if for example, I'll just use a simple one and say, if there was an initiative, which there is an initiative to provide funding for small businesses, let's say, and you run it through this, and out the other side of that, it says, you know, actually funding for small businesses that are women and minority owned businesses actually speaks more to equity than just a general benefit of grants to small businesses. Let's just say that as an example. That would allow that tool to be tailored, or that initiative to be tailored to say, yes, we're going to provide funding for small businesses, but in an effort to overcome some kind of inequity or promoting inequity, its orientation is going to be predominantly toward those that are minority owned or small business. That's just an example of how that tool might further refine what we would use these initiatives for. So that's one thing that's going to happen, is each of these will be run through that tool, and then that information will be provided to the group for concurrence or consensus with the results of that. So that's one piece of that, or piece of next step. The second piece is you actually are going to get a homework assignment this time between now and our next meeting. So one of the things that I will do is take the list of priority items that the groups have reported out, and I will send that list to you. And then I'm going to ask each of you individually, out of that whole list of 25, 26 items, to yourself identify the 2 or 3 off of that list that are the absolute most important across all sectors that we need to focus on. The idea of that is we're going to bring that back in a cumulative way to start identifying the areas that clearly demand the most significance, the most impact. That's going to help us divvy up kind of the funding. So not that there won't be 20 initiatives, there may be 20 initiatives, but if everyone agrees that 3 or 4 of those are absolute top, then I would expect a significant amount of the funding will go to support those 3 or 4. So that'll be your homework in between this meeting and the next meeting. And again, hopefully that will make more sense as we go forward with that. And Jan's got a question before I move on. She's got a question about the equity. She says, on the equity item, is a minority-owned small business defined? And is there a legal definition, or does one self-identify? A little bit of both. I think the small business, there is definitely a legal, if you will, definition that has been used for all of the other COVID funding, and we would fall back on that. And I think the cutoff is like 50 employees or less as the kind of that definition, but we'll use that same definition. The minority-owned business or the women-owned business, I think we would default to those that have actually claimed some kind of official status to that regard with it. But again, that'd be an item we would talk through further. You also may look at the kind of those micro businesses, those one-person kind of owned businesses may also be an area that you would focus on and stuff. So keep that in mind as we run through. But yes, I think there are some definitions that we would use to kind of help refine that kind of thinking as we go through. So good question. So in addition to the running the things through the equity tool and the homework question, then I think the third thing that we will do is actually related to the public hearing. So next Tuesday, we will have the public hearing associated with this. And a couple of things to note are that, one, that will be a meeting of the task force. So I will need at least 20 members of the task force to join us via Zoom at that meeting, because we actually will need to convene the meeting just like we would this kind of task force, open up the public hearing, and then community members would join in via phone or via Zoom, video or phone. I guess it'd all be through phone. We wouldn't do probably any of the video, and then work our way through. And then really, that's all we do at the public hearing. We'll actually have the public hearing, take any kind of comments from the public, close the public hearing, and that's it. There's no discussion about what's in it, because we'll pick that discussion up the next day at your meeting next Wednesday. In terms of the format of the public hearing, the way I intend on structuring it is, maybe for 5-10 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, once all the folks that have joined, that wish to join, we will very quickly run through with them what the objective of this effort is, what the purpose of the task force is, the work that you've done so far, and share with the group in some way in which they can see it, this list, this kind of prioritized list. These are right now, the tentative priority list of items that might be considered for recommendation. And we will be trying to get two things from the public. One is any other items that they would like to add new to that list, and perhaps even more important, where do they fall on that priority list? Do they also concur that those are the priorities? And do they themselves have any kind of prioritization within that priority list? We will also make that priority list available online prior to the meeting, so that anyone that might be thinking of participating in the meeting will have access to it in advance of the meeting. But that's the objective really of the public hearing, is to solicit any new ideas that maybe this group has not yet thought of, and also to begin to get some feedback on that prioritization. So those would be the two objectives that we would have as this effort. The public notice was published in the newspaper today for that meeting. And so later today, we will start promoting it out on social media, as well as our other means. I would encourage any of you to promote it to any of the folks that you feel need to be aware that this is going to go on. So if you represent a group or you just have friends, encourage them to join in on it. All of the information will be out there as to how they actually get, but what they need to do is they need to register with the clerk's office, and that information is on both the website as well as in the ad that ran. And by registering with the clerk's office, they will get the contact information to join in the meeting. And again, it's next Tuesday at 7 o'clock associated with that. So do we have any questions about that, that public hearing? Everyone good? And again, 7 o'clock, and Joe knows, having and the mayor, both the mayor and the vice mayor have gone through lots of these public hearings. And for these task forces, even for big public hearings we have otherwise, don't be overly surprised if there's not an abundance of people who participate, but hopefully we'll at least get some people that will participate and do so with some quality as we go through as well. It's just one more opportunity to make sure that we've considered all of the possibilities that are out there as well. Jan asked a follow-up question about the question regarding the minority-owned businesses. It says, so anyone can say they are a minority to access the funding. Not necessarily. Again, I think there's some specific definitions that we'll fall back on that have to be met as well. And then Karen asked about use of possibly of a poll to prioritize the list. And yes, we could do that. We could even take, I could take the list that you all just constructed, and we could certainly dump that into like a SurveyMonkey kind of list and just make it easy for you all to go on there and actually just click the ones that you feel are the priority ones. If that's the easiest, certainly would be easy to tabulate. So I'm seeing some nodding heads. So maybe we'll give that a try. Push that. I mean, I'm going to create the list anyway, so we'll just create the list and push it out to you all as some type of SurveyMonkey. And then Jan is saying the poll would be a good idea too. She had actually talked with me previously about the idea of using a percentage rather than a priority. And we may take that approach too, so that because what Jan had talked about is if we actually ask to kind of have you rank some of these by percentages. So you say, I think that, this is, this represents 50% of the effort or whatever. It easily translates then into the money piece of it too. So we'll think about a couple of options to do with that. But I do think doing some kind of poll would be advantageous.
Okay. Woo, yeah, good job.
Scared.
So, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wondered about so the ad says if you wish to address the task force that you need to register. If you all put something like a Facebook together, could we make it clear that if they also need to do this if they just want to attend? Because that's going to be how they get the link, right? They need to register.
We will probably be, and I don't know if will we be broadcasting that on Facebook?
Well, Facebook Live.
Okay,
yeah.
so it'll be broadcast on Facebook Live.
You don't need it.
Right. That's a good question and a good point as well. And when we push it out, that had to have all the formal language in it. When we push notice out later today and tomorrow out through social media, it will be a little bit more attractive. it will hopefully, yeah, no offense to the lawyers, but it'll hopefully stimulate some interest. I mean, I think if what we talked about was pushing out there and saying, hey, have you ever wanted to help the city figure out how to spend $5 or $6 million? I mean, this is your chance. I mean, that we can be a little more vernacular, I think, about how we approach that as well. And again, yes, people can, and it will also be recorded and then will be set up on the webpage too, so that if someone can't join it at that time, they can view it afterwards as well, and certainly continue to offer any thoughts or comments that we have.
Bob, make sure that when we decide whether it's going to be either a poll or percentage, that it's clear for that the citizens will understand either way as we go into this, because when you start bringing the public in, you want to make sure everybody's clear and understands what we're saying and how we get to the point or get to making the decisions that we make. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah, definitely. And my understanding is really the idea of the percentage or the poll or whatever we do will be for this group. So for the community, really, we just want to get their thoughts, and we'll capture those. And then this group will actually be the one that's doing the kind of polling. And we'll make that very clear with the community of what the purpose of their involvement is with this as well. And then as Dan mentioned and kind of noted as well, the purpose of this really is, this public hearing is really to listen. So it's not designed for any kind of sort of conversation or back and forth. In this case, it really is just to have them come up, talk for a few minutes about what their ideas are or what they think about the priorities. And then we just kind of close the meeting, and then we'll come back as a group and talk about, at that point, what you think based on what you heard. And really the idea is, based on what you heard, is there anything that you're wanting to change on your list as we go forward? Because really that meeting next Wednesday is structured to be the last meeting in person of this group. And so what we'll be doing is, between now and then, I'll be taking everything that you've put together with this and beginning to create a draft set of recommendations, basically a draft document. And that's what we'll review and tweak at your meeting next Wednesday, in part based on what you hear at Tuesday's meeting. There is the possibility that between the 15th and the 20th, you know, we may be able to do some, still some editing with the group kind of behind the scenes and stuff. But in terms of group getting together formally, next Wednesday will be the last opportunity until the meeting on the 20th. And the plan right now, just so you all know, the plan is that on the July 20th meeting that the council will be meeting in chambers. So you all have the opportunity either just simply to view the meeting, or if folks actually want to be able to attend the meeting as well. That'll be kind of up to you as we go through. We'll talk more about that on the 15th on your meeting next week. Any other questions about those three things? Again, you'll get the information. We'll have some kind of homework associated with it. We will be soliciting input through the public hearing piece. And I already forgot what I said was the first one I was going to do. So there's three things we're going to be doing. So yeah, those three. Everybody good with those? All right, very good, very good. Mayor and Vice Mayor, that's all that I had for us to try to get through today, and I greatly appreciate everyone's help in doing that. But I would certainly open up to you, either Vice Mayor or Mayor, any questions or any further information that you want to provide to the group, or any other thoughts.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their commitment and dedication to this, and I think this is going to be very, very helpful to us on council. And I look forward to the meeting on Tuesday, when we have the public to come in and to listen. But thank everybody for your commitment and dedication.
I had one comment about our homework assignment. And it was basically because looking over the list, it seems like if we took education or re-education for to find new jobs for unemployed workers.
Did we lose you?
Took, let's say the maintenance part for had something about about getting a package together to help people find new jobs. Some of these things seem like they could be wrapped up in one bundle because, you know, several people mentioned education and proper testing about, is that something we could do in our homework if we say, oh, could this and this be blended together such that it's one unit?
What I'll actually do is be doing some of that up front. So when you see the list, if it's in a poll or whatever it might be, if several of the groups, for example, which they did, have mentioned like PPE, you'll only see one item dealing with PPE.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because I want to make, so we'll take this kind of 24 item and it'll probably get collapsed already down to, 20 items or something as I combine those that have similarities as we go through. Absolutely.
This is Joe. Just to recap on the equity piece and the GARE information, is that part of our homework as well as we're reviewing these, to ask ourselves to reflect individually, and then subsequently will we in our meeting next Wednesday have opportunity to address all of these priorities through this equity lens?
Yes and yes. So what I would ask as you all are doing kind of the homework piece is to kind of just mentally kind of run each of those through that tool. I will be doing that. The staff will be doing that formally. And so what we'll have when we come back on the 15th is each of these items will have answers to those questions. And that'll be a part of your conversation then when you come back on Wednesday. So what you'll do at that point, because hopefully you've already thought about those, and you kind of run those through your questions as well, you'll see what we've done kind of formally with it. And then we'll make sure there's consensus on what the answers to those questions, use of that tool yields. Because again, I think in this case, I think the real power of that tool is going to be actually shaping the initiatives more than it will be eliminating any of the initiatives. So it'll be pretty key, I think, as we go through. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to the mayor for our adjournment. So, all right, I'm not seeing anything. So, Mayor, the next item I believe then is, again, next meeting. You'll have two meetings, next week, but you'll have a meeting on the evening of the 14th, which is the public hearing, and you'll have a meeting on the 15th, same time at 11 o'clock. And with that, Mayor, then the next item is adjournment, unless there's anything else.
No, and nobody seems to have any questions. So thank you all again, and we are adjourned until next Tuesday, the 14th at 7 o'clock p.m. Thank you.
Thank you all.